You might have heard about him, the young emperor who shocked ancient Rome. But most histories forget one crucial detail. He wasn't born into power. He wasn't a general, not even a scholar. He was a boy, 14 years old, barely a teenager. Came to Rome not as a conqueror, but as an experiment. And he changed everything. In 218 AD, across the Mediterranean, two women maneuvered. Julia Soemius and her sister Julia Misa. They weren't nobles. They weren't priestesses. They were determined. And what they wanted was unimaginable: to place their son on the throne of Rome, not by conquest, not by blood, but by strategy. This is the story of Elagabalus, how a boy from Syria became the most flamboyant emperor Rome never expected. When the throne was offered, most senators would have demanded a military leader, a strong male to continue Rome's victories. But Julia Soemius had other plans. Her son was different, quiet, mysterious, almost otherworldly. He was not what Rome expected, wanted, or understood. But that didn't stop her. And when the messengers arrived, she sent her son forward. At 14, Elagabalus stepped into a world he didn't understand. The Senate, powerful men shouting in the Roman Forum, plotting, bargaining, debating. He knew he couldn't win them over with strength or strategy. So he did something unexpected. He dressed in silk, adorned with jewels, sending ripples of shock through the ancient heart of Rome. For a city that valued practicality and power, his appearance was a question mark. It was also a statement. If they wanted a god on the throne, they would get one. When he walked into the Senate, voices followed. He spoke in riddles and metaphors, dropping hints of a grander truth, but never quite revealing it. He didn't claim to be a descendant of Mars or Jupiter. He said he was more. He claimed to be a god, but not the gods Rome knew. In his own words, I am Elagabalus, the sun god, from Syria, his mother's family land. To the Romans, he was practically a ghost. To himself, he was sacred. When Elagabalus entered Rome, it wasn't with an army. It was with incense and color. He arrived in the city of marble and might, and he started building. He instructed architects to construct temples based on dreams. He commissioned artisans to craft altars unlike any seen before. He celebrated festivals, blending Roman tradition with Syrian mystery. Rome was a city of conquerors, but its new emperor didn't come to rule through war. He came draped in silk, carrying not a sword, but a sacred black stone. Every morning, he walked this stone through the streets, wrapped in linen, carried high above the heads of the crowds. It was a symbol of his god, but to the Romans, it was an enigma. Elagabalus dressed differently. He spoke cryptically. He conducted strange rituals. He surrounded himself with a small group of trusted advisors, some whispering that he practiced forbidden magic, some saying he was preparing to overthrow the traditional Roman gods. As his influence grew, so did the whispers. Did he believe he was truly divine? Was he mocking Rome, or was he merely misunderstood? Elagabalus was changing Rome, not with legions or laws, but with poetry and pageantry. The cynic grew wary. The generals kept their distance, and the people, well, they were confused. He rearranged the feasts. He redefined what it meant to be Roman. He believed joy and devotion were paths to the divine, so he decorated the city with flowers. He organized games celebrating life, beauty, and diversity. He invited poets to the palace, hosting symposia where wine flowed and ideas danced. It was as if an alien being had landed in ancient Rome. It wasn't an invasion force. It was an idea, demonstration of identity. And the craziest part, nobody stopped him, because behind the boy emperor stood two formidable women, Julia Misa and Julia Soemius, his grandmother and mother. They were ambitious, cunning, and ruthless. And as long as Elagabalus remained their vessel, Rome couldn't touch him. He didn't seek war. He didn't want your land or resources. All he desired was acceptance. He wanted to show Rome a different way, to lead not through domination, but through devotion, to transform not just the city, but its perception of itself. He was a beacon of difference in a sea of sameness. He dared to stand out in a world that valued fitting in, and in doing so, he showed Rome a path it had never considered. He ruled for only a few years, but his impact echoed for centuries. When his time ended, Rome exhaled. Temples returned to their old rituals. The altars were dismantled, the celebrations toned down. But something had shifted. A boundary had been crossed. Elagabalus wasn't just a ruler of Rome. He was a glimpse into the future, a reminder that power doesn't always need to be overt, that identity can be a weapon and a shield, and that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones we don't see. If you're drawn to the forgotten corners of history where belief, power, and identity collide, subscribe to this channel. We don't just tell stories, we uncover them. Till next time, you have reached a fever pitch. Your mind is a labyrinth of its own making. The weight of an empire presses down, a burden ill-fitted for one so young. All around you, cracks are forming, not just in the marble and stone, but in the very soul of Rome. You are the architect of this unease, yet you do not see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Welcome back to Rome, the year 218 AD, where once there was grandeur, now there is unease. You stand at the heart of it, the epicenter of a city that has seen its share of crises, but never one like this. You feel the pulse of Rome quickening, not with excitement, but with fear. What you do not understand is that your journey is far from over. There are twists and turns yet to come, shadows lurking at every corner. Your story is one of contradictions. Born into the lap of luxury, you are a prince without a kingdom. Thrust onto the throne by circumstance and maneuverings of your grandmother, Julia Misa. Now, it's 5 years into your reign, you find yourself presiding over an empire that is no longer yours, not truly. Rome, the eternal city, is a tapestry woven with threads of tradition, custom, and hierarchy. You challenge this fabric with every step you take, leaving gaping holes in its texture. You are Elagabalus, the spoiled child of fortune, and you have challenged the very gods to assert your dominance. Jupiter, the king of gods, the supreme ruler of the heavens, is now subordinate to your eastern sun god. You have declared Rome's highest deity a mere servant in your celestial court. Ceremonies that other emperors have treated as sacrosanct, you conduct with irreverent abandon. Oaths that were once binding vows, you reinterpreted with casual ease. Even the Senate, the venerable institution of Rome, watches in stunned silence as you redefine rituals that have stood the test of time. Yet, amid the gasps and whispers, you forge ahead, seeking unity amidst the clash of old and new. You bring Rome's most sacred figures into your personal pantheon, attempting to bridge the divide. But the divide only widens, leaving behind a chasm of confusion and consternation. As the marble walls of Rome seem to remember every tremor in your reign, the empire can no longer tell whether to laugh, fear, or fall silent. For this is no longer just a reign, 'tis a transformation, so unsettling that even the stones bear witness. In the grand halls of the imperial palace, once a seat of strategy and governance, the atmosphere grows heavy. Decisions that should be guided by law are now dictated by emotion, impulse, and symbolism. Every gathering stretches into days, becoming a luxurious celebration where identity, status, and decorum blur into one long procession of splendor. But beneath the layers of gold and incense, the true cost is measured in the hearts and minds of men. You, the emperor, have become a sculptor of destinies, unaware that not all subjects willingly submit to your grand design. As you surround yourself with rare flowers and let exotic animals roam, those within your inner circle learn a chilling truth. Every glance, every whisper, every gesture, no matter how small, carries the weight of scrutiny and the risk of retribution. In the grand theater of your court, you are both the playwright and the enforcer. And when the play does not go as you wish, you demand a rewrite. Those who disagree with your vision, those who fail to dance to your tune, find themselves distanced, their influence quietly erased, their names no longer spoken in the hallowed halls of power. But you are not deaf to the whispers, nor blind to the growing unease. You seek solace in forbidden lore, questioning the very essence of your existence. Could there be more to this mortal coil? Could you, as some legends hint, change not just your identity, but its very nature? In the hushed chambers of your private quarters, you summon physicians, asking questions that have echoed through the ages. Is it possible to alter the form that confines the spirit? Can you shed this mortal skin to become something more, something unbound by the limits of humanity? The answers you seek lie shrouded in secrecy, hidden in scrolls and texts that others fear to touch. Yet you, driven by an insatiable curiosity, delve into these forbidden depths. The Empire watches, fascinated and fearful, as you, the untouchable emperor, become consumed by the mysteries of existence. They see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon and wonder if you will ever look up. Meanwhile, the wily Misa, your own grandmother, the architect of your rise to power, observes it all in measured silence. She sees the cracks in the foundations of your reign, the crumbling support that holds your rule aloft. With a politician's foresight, she senses the shifting winds of change and turns her attention elsewhere. Her gaze settles on a young member of the family, Severus Alexander, everything you are not. He is quiet, traditional, and most importantly, easily moldable. The Senate approves. The military takes notice. Even the Praetorian Guard, the very embodiment of Rome's defense, begin to murmur in your shadow. As the plot thickens around you, you remain oblivious, lost in the labyrinth of your own making. Legends tell of a last-ditch effort, a grand spectacle designed to sway the hearts of Rome. You invite all the influential players to a feast, hoping to sway them with your charm. But the die is cast, and there is no turning back. The seeds of doubt have been sown, and the harvest is at hand. Rome has reached a tipping point. The cracks in your rule have widened into chasms. The whispers against you have grown into roars. The people, the very soul of this empire, have made their choice. And in the end, it is not a battle, but a ballet. A carefully choreographed dance of political maneuvering that seals your fate. On the grand stage of the Roman Forum, the curtain is falling. But legends, they say, never truly die. So let's get to the last part of our series. By the close of 221 AD, a strange stillness settled over the empire. Elagabalus still sat on the throne, draped in silk, layered in pearls, but the silence surrounding him had changed. No longer adoration, no longer awe. Now it was observation, because Rome was tired. Tired of spectacle, tired of mystery disguised as law, tired of waking each morning to declarations drenched in incense and drama. And behind him, quiet, poised and gaining power, stood Severus Alexander, young, measured, unassuming, everything Elagabalus was not. The shift in power was subtle. Coins bearing Alexander's image began to circulate. Senators sought his opinion. The imperial guard started addressing him with titles once reserved for emperors. And Elagabalus, still wrapped in ritual and comfort, seemed either unaware or unwilling to believe that Rome could move forward without him. But Julia Misa, his grandmother, believed otherwise. She had once built him into a ruler. Now she quietly began to unbuild him. Elagabalus began to sense the change. Paranoia crept into his voice. He tried to strip Alexander of authority, dismissed his advisors, spoke publicly against him, but the empire had already chosen. The Praetorian Guard had already turned. The Senate had already stepped away. The end was no longer a question, only a moment waiting to arrive. One morning, the emperor made a final attempt to assert control. He summoned the guard, demanding that his cousin be arrested. He raised his voice. He issued threats. But the guard did not move. The emperor, once treated as sacred, untouchable, stood alone. And then, without warning, they turned, not in anger, not in haste, but with the certainty of a decision already made. He was escorted out of the palace, stripped of authority. He clung to his mother, his final ally. But the future had already shifted. The city had moved on, and the guard followed orders, not born from loyalty, but necessity. Elagabalus, no longer emperor, no longer divine, was removed from the world of marble and incense he had created. His life ended, not with ceremony, but with conclusion. No royal honors followed. No eulogies whispered in sacred halls. His name was not preserved. His legacy was not defended. What remained was silence. There were no statues, no processions, no public mourning. His body was discarded. His memory buried, not in reverence, but in rejection. But history rarely forgets so easily, because Rome, so skilled at rewriting its past, struggled with this chapter. A chapter not marked by conquest or diplomacy, but by transformation, by disruption. Elagabalus had reshaped the palace, not with war, but with ideas. And while those ideas were soon dismantled, they left behind a shadow. Keyed temples dedicated to his god were dismantled. Laws he had passed were quickly repealed. Coins bearing his image were melted, and the echoes of his rituals faded into myth. But not everything disappeared, because Rome had looked into a mirror and seen itself altered. His reign lasted just 4 years, and yet his presence reverberated far beyond them. He had broken norms, challenged identities, and unsettled a civilization built on order. And when he fell, he left behind not just silence, but precedent. Julia Misa lived on, guiding the next emperor quietly, strategically, just as she had before. The empire resumed its rhythm, but something had changed. Because no matter how many laws were rewritten or names were erased from marble, some stories simply refuse to stay buried. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this content, please like and share. Q again, and we'll see you next time. The boy emperor was gone. His body vanished in the river. His name erased from monuments. But what Rome had witnessed could not be forgotten. Elagabalus had not simply worn a crown, he had lifted a veil. He had exposed something the empire didn't want to see, how thin the thread was between ceremony and madness, between devotion and performance, between the sacred and the grotesque. In the quiet aftermath, Rome tried to breathe again. Julia Misa, the architect of this divine experiment, placed a new boy on the throne, Severus Alexander, composed, reserved, agreeable. Temples reopened. Senators resumed their routines. The city exhaled, but the memory remained, not in books, not in speeches, but in sensation. That brief stretch of time when the palace had ceased to rule and had begun to perform. Historians labeled it a disgrace. They painted Elagabalus as a warning, a barbarian, an aberration. But the truth, buried beneath layers of shame and laughter, was far more complex. He was indulgent, yes. He was absorbed by pleasure, obsessed with transformation, but he had also been alone. A child placed on a throne, not by merit or war, but by calculation, told from birth that he was divine, raised without question, fed not with guidance, but with incense and applause. He believed what they told him. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous belief of all. There was cruelty in his reign, but it was not always calculated. Much of it came from confusion, from unbound power given too soon to someone too unready. His rituals were not just for show. They were his language, and the empire didn't know how to respond. The discomfort surrounding Elagabalus isn't simply about his actions. It's about how close he came to shifting the core of Rome. Had his reign lasted longer? Had he kept control of the guard? Had Julia Misa hesitated just a little more? The empire might have changed forever. Not through conquest, but through transformation. He brought foreign gods into the center of Roman life. Not as guests, but as rulers. For a brief time, they didn't just visit Rome. They sat on its throne. And Rome, proud, stoic, stubbornly accepted it. In the centuries that followed, the empire would paint over his memory. His name became a joke. His reign a footnote. The reality lost beneath mockery. But truth has a way of lingering in quiet rooms, in old scrolls, in the minds of those who study history, not for comfort, but for understanding. Because what Elagabalus demonstrated was not just indulgence, revealed the soft spots in the foundation of empire. The places where myth takes root, where identity can be rewritten, redefined. He tested the limits of what it meant to rule, not with armies or edicts, but with sensation. His legacy isn't carved in stone. It lives in the atmosphere. It's a certain tension that still echoes when power tries to merge with the sacred. Taint when identity becomes law. A taint when ritual becomes government. Elagabalus didn't need temples to leave a mark. He didn't need battles to change the story. He altered the empire through presence alone. Rome would later try to ignore him, pretend he never existed. But the unease remained. The silent question never fully answered. What if he wasn't insane? What if what frightened Rome the most was how many were willing to follow him? His power didn't come from violence. It came from persuasion, from allure, from theater. And for a moment, it worked. Rome could not defeat him in the arena, so it wrote him out of history. But that, too, is a form of performance. To erase an opponent is to acknowledge their power. To conquer a king is to kill him in battle. But to erase a king from memory is to admit his victory. By all accounts, Elagabalus should have been forgotten. His reign was too short, too chaotic to have any lasting impact. Here we are, 1800 years later, still trying to understand what he did and why. Because he offers a glimpse of something unnerving, a reminder of how easily belief can be manufactured, how quickly ritual can become law, how simple it is to mistake devotion for control. He was a child when he took the throne, and a child he remained until his death. He delighted in the trappings of power, the adulation, the gold, the chariots. He also reveled in the simple pleasures of life, food, wine, the company of men and women who pleased him. Some called him a god, others a monster. But perhaps the most fitting description is this. Was a boy who liked to play emperor, and in doing so, he revealed the fragility of empire itself. I'm the author of a book about the last days of the Roman Empire. Thank you for watching this video. His name vanished from records. Temples, once built in his honor, collapsed into silence. Marble statues were cast into the river, their faces broken. Rome did everything it could to erase him. But erasure is not the same as forgetting. Because, for a brief moment, Rome had believed in him. And belief, once given, doesn't disappear. It lingers, even when it becomes shame. He ruled for only 4 years. Yet, those years bent the empire in ways no war ever could. He did not govern through conquest. He didn't win battles. He didn't rewrite laws. Instead, he turned the act of ruling into something else entirely. Something unrecognizable. Something sacred and terrifying. The empire became a stage, each law a performance, each decree a ritual. Power didn't flow from the sword, but from illusion. And when it all ended, what remained wasn't relief. It was exposure. Because Rome had seen itself without armor. Elagabalus wasn't remembered for his policies or speeches. He was remembered for what he reflected. He became a mirror. Not just for emperors, but for civilizations. A reflection of what happens when power and desire blur. When divinity is claimed, not inherited. When identity ceases to be private and becomes a public spectacle. He didn't want obedience. He demanded devotion, not loyalty, but reverence. He didn't desire to rule the empire. He wanted to redefine it, to turn it into something new, something that matched the image he carried within himself, and for a short time succeeded. This is why he endures, not for how he fell, but for how far he reached. Temples may crumble, statues may break, but memory flows like water, and some names refuse to sink. A boy dressed in silks, a voice that called itself divine, a throne surrounded by shadows and flame. These aren't just images, they're echoes. And the more time passes, the louder they seem to become. He was cast into the river. A final insult, a final gesture of disgust, but the river doesn't erase, carries, case, and somewhere beneath layers of mud and time, that story still moves. Rome, in its pride, tried to forget, but forgetting only fuels the mystery, and a mystery always finds its way back. His reign may have collapsed in blood and betrayal, but its message remains. That identity, unchallenged, can rewrite the rules. That devotion, once misdirected, can become its own tyranny. That spectacle, once welcomed, is hard to contain. What made him dangerous was not just what he did. It was how easily others followed, how quickly they adapted to the rituals, how willingly they watched. He offered them something strange, not power, not order, but transformation. And many were ready to take it, till they weren't, until the illusion cracked, until fear replaced fascination, and by then it was too late. The empire recovered, but only on the surface. Deep down, the questions remained, the unease, the wondering. What if he hadn't fallen? What if the transformation had completed? What would Rome look like then? Because his death ended a reign, but it also began something else. A warning, a myth, a memory wrapped in incense and silence. Today, we speak his name not to praise it, but to examine it, to understand what it meant, what it still means, and why it was feared enough to be buried so violently. Because the past does not stay buried. It waits, and sometimes it returns in different forms. Here at Dark Hours Archive, we don't look away. We follow the stories others have hidden. We dig into the cracks. We sit in the shadows of power and ask the questions most are afraid to voice. If you followed us through this story, then you already understand. This was never just about an emperor. It was about something far older and far more familiar to tools. The masks, the transformation of flesh into symbol, of politics into prayer, of identity into spectacle. It didn't end with Elagabalus. It just changed shape, and it still walks with us. In every leader who confuses worship with service, in every system that cloaks control in sacred robes, in every place where identity becomes a performance. So if you want to explore more of history's hidden chambers, dark, buried, uncomfortable truths, they're here, waiting. Subscribe to the channel. New stories unfold each week, some long forgotten, others never told. At each one, a reminder that the line between past and present is thinner than we think. Because some gods never truly leave. They just find new names.